At 63, I had just scattered my wife's ashes into the cold Atlantic when my phone suddenly buzzed. Her name appeared on the screen. My hands froze. Open the family album. Don't let our son see it. The message came 3 days after her funeral. My wife was gone, yet somehow she was still trying to warn me. That night I opened the old album she had protected for decades. Hidden inside was not just photographs, but a secret about our family she had died protecting. What I found made me question everything I believed about my family. Before we begin, drop a quick comment. Have you ever had someone you trusted completely surprise you with something you never saw coming, just yes or no? Your perspective might be what someone else needs today. Quick note. Some details are fictionalized to emphasize the lesson. What matters most is the message I hope stays with you. At 63, I stood beside my wife's casket in the coastal wind, still believing my son was the finest thing I'd ever helped build. Opal Finch, my wife of 48 years, lay in that dark wood casket, having taken her secrets to a grave I didn't yet understand. The October wind off the Atlantic cut through St. Brendan's stone church, like it had for 200 years, whistling through the gaps in the stained glass windows that no one ever seemed to fix. I held her gold pocket watch in my palm, the one she'd carried every day since we married, feeling its weight like an anchor. Remy Finch, 41, stood beside me in a tailored navy suit that cost more than my truck, his hand resting on my shoulder in what everyone would call comfort. His other hand stayed hidden beneath his overcoat, and I felt him shift his weight every 30 seconds, like a man with somewhere else to be. He checked his luxury watch even as the minister spoke about eternal rest. "She's at peace now, Dad," he whispered, leaning close enough that I could smell his expensive cologne. "She wouldn't want you standing here in the cold." I nodded because that's what you do when your son offers comfort at your wife's funeral. I didn't see his hidden hand typing beneath the coat. Didn't see the screen glow faintly against the dark fabric. Didn't see the message he sent while his thumb traced circles on my shoulder. It's done. Mildred Ramsey, 78 and silver-haired, watched my son from the third pew with eyes that cut like surgical steel. I'd known Mildred for 30 years, through the Harbor Watch Business Association, but I'd never seen her look at anyone the way she looked at Remy that morning. Her hands stayed folded in her lap, perfectly still, but her gaze never wavered. When I caught her eye, she gave me a single nod, no words, no smile, just that surgical precision that made me feel like I was being measured for something I didn't understand yet. 3 rows behind Mildred sat Martha Callahan, 64, who had run the Harbor Watch community Facebook page and local news channel for 20 years, with the same quiet dedication she brought to everything. She and Opal had been close friends since the 70s. She dabbed her eyes with a folded tissue and didn't look at Remy once. Chief Sayomara Delaney, 36 in her pressed uniform, stood at the back of the church like a sentinel. She'd grown up 3 streets over from our clock shop, and I'd fixed her father's pocket watch twice before he passed. Now she was Harbor Watch's police chief, and she stood with her hands clasped in front of her, watching the service with an expression I couldn't read. Whether she was protecting us or watching us, I couldn't say. The minister finished his prayer. People filed past the casket, touching the polished wood, whispering condolences I didn't hear. Remy shook hands, accepted hugs, performed grief like a man who'd studied the choreography. I stood there thinking, 48 years. How do you let go of 48 years in a single morning? You think you know your own son. You think 41 years of shared breakfasts and bedtime stories build a foundation you can trust. You think the boy who learned to tie his shoes at your workbench, who asked you to explain how every gear in a watch connects to every other gear, who called you every Sunday. Without fail, you think that boy grew into a man whose heart you can read like a familiar timepiece. I thought I knew Remy the way I knew the 1904 regulator clock in my shop window. Every tick, every rhythm, every small adjustment needed to keep it running true. I was wrong about both. By 11, the service ended. People scattered to their cars under a sky the color of old pewter. I sat alone in my Ford F-15, in the church parking lot, engine off, watching mourners depart through a windshield, fogging with my own breath. The pocket watch sat on the dashboard, its gold case catching what little light filtered through the October clouds. My phone buzzed. I almost ignored it, almost let it go to voicemail, like I'd let the last 40 calls go. All those kind people who meant well, but whose words I couldn't bear to hear yet. But something made me look. The screen showed a text message from Opal's number. The phone I'd personally deactivated 3 days ago. The phone I'd shut off with my own hands and locked in my nightstand drawer because I couldn't stand seeing her name light up my screen, knowing she'd never answer again. How does a woman who has passed send a text message 3 days after you watch them seal her casket? My hands shook as I opened it. The family album, bottom drawer of the Clockwork Shop. Don't let Remy see. I read it twice, 3 times. The words didn't change. My wife's phone, deactivated and locked away, had just sent me a message telling me to hide something from our son. I looked up through the fog glass. Remy stood at the church entrance, maybe 50 feet away, staring directly at my truck. Not at the church, not at the other mourners still lingering near their cars. At me. His face was completely unreadable, not grief, not concern, not even curiosity. Just that same blank expression I'd seen 100 times when he was calculating something, working through a problem in his head, like he used to work through math homework at the kitchen table. How long had he been standing there? How long had he been watching? The phone buzzed again. I gripped it so hard the case creaked, my eyes locked on my son through the windshield. He hadn't moved, hadn't blinked, just stood there in his expensive suit with his hands in his pockets, watching his father sit alone in a truck in a church parking lot, holding a phone that shouldn't be able to send messages from beyond the grave. I looked down at the second text. He's watching you right now. Drive straight to the shop. Don't stop. Don't let him follow you. There's a USB drive in the album. Everything you need to know is on it. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you while I was alive. I love you. Opal. The pocket watch on the dashboard ticked. The Atlantic wind rattled a truck. Through the fogged windshield, Remy took one step forward, and I realized my wife had spent her final years building something I was only now beginning to see, something that had my son's face in its crosshairs and my hands on the trigger I didn't know I was holding. I took the back roads home, checking my mirrors every 30 seconds, the phone with my late wife's message burning a hole in my coat pocket. Remy's silhouette stayed in the church parking lot, watching until I turned the corner onto Harbor Road. The workshop smelled like linseed oil and metal shavings when I slipped through the back door, the familiar scent catching in my throat. 40 years I'd run this clock shop, and now every shadow felt wrong. I went straight to the bottom drawer of my parts cabinet, the one that stuck, unless you lifted while pulling. The purple linen photo album sat exactly where it always had, spine faded from sun that filtered through the east window every morning for a decade. I'd watched Opal page through it 100 times, her fingers tracing faces of relatives long gone, smiling at our wedding photos, like she was discovering them fresh. I opened it, expecting photographs. The center had been carved out with surgical precision, pages glued together in blocks, edges sealed with something that looked like bookbinding adhesive, creating a cavity maybe 3 inches deep. Inside that hollow, a black USB drive, a brass key on a tagged ring reading Warehouse 117, and a torn page with Opal's handwriting, "The people in these photographs no longer exist." My hands shook as I lifted the USB. She'd done this. My wife had spent months, maybe years, systematically destroying a family album to build a hiding place, gluing page after page, while I worked 10 feet away, oblivious. How many times had I seen her with this album and thought she was just remembering? How many evenings had she sat at the kitchen table, carefully hollowing out our history while I read the paper? I slipped the items into my coat pocket just as I heard the front door open. "Dad, you here?" Remy's voice carried the same warm concern it had at the church. I closed the album, slid it back shut the drawer. In the workshop, I called, keeping my voice steady. He appeared in the doorway with his own key already in his hand, the spare I'd given him years ago for emergencies. His eyes weren't on me. They cataloged the drawers, the shelves, the seams of the wall panels, like he was taking inventory of a stranger's estate. "I came to help pack things up," he said, stepping inside. "You shouldn't be alone in here right now." His gaze swept the room with the methodical precision of a man looking for something specific. That's when I saw it, white chalk dust on the hem of his navy trousers, stark against the dark fabric. Not dirt, not dust from kneeling at a grave. Chalk. The kind I used to mark measurements on metal before cutting. "I'm fine," I said. "Just needed to be around her things." He crossed the room, pulled me into a hug that smelled like cologne, and something else, anxiety maybe, or adrenaline. His hand patted my back 3 times, perfunctory. "Get some rest," he said, pulling back. "I'll check in this evening." He kissed my cheek the way he'd done since childhood and walked out. The front door chimed. Through the window, I watched him climb into his black Audi phone already at his ear before he'd even started the engine. You spend 50 years fixing broken mechanism springs, that snap gears, that slip balance, wheels that won't true, but you never expect the one thing you built with your own hands to be the thing that's rusted from the inside. I waited 30 minutes before I moved. At 5:30, the industrial waterfront smelled like salt and diesel and old fish, the kind of smell that soaks into your clothes and doesn't wash out. Warehouse 117 sat in a row of identical corrugated steel units, each with a rolling door and a padlock. The brass key fit perfectly. Inside the cold storage unit, a single item waited on the concrete floor, a black Dell laptop. Fully charged power cord plugged into the unit's electrical outlet. Beside it sat a sealed brown envelope with Opal's handwriting, "Open after the USB." I knelt on the cold concrete, my knees protesting, and opened the laptop. It came to life immediately, password already bypassed, desktop clean, except for a single folder icon. Not Whitmore and Sons, not some code name, just the full account. I plugged in the USB drive. The first subfolder was labeled Phone Protocol, and suddenly I understood. Opal had set up a cloud schedule message through a third-party app, timed to send 72 hours after her death, routed through a remote server that required no active SIM. She had deactivated the physical phone herself, knowing the message would still fire from the cloud on schedule. She had planned even that. Even the exact moment I would sit frozen in a church parking lot, reading her name on a dead screen. A directory tree bloomed across the screen. Folders nested inside, folders each labeled with dates, names, amounts. Client files, transaction records, scanned documents. And at the top, a video file time-stamped 3 weeks before Opal's stroke. Start here. The laptop hummed in the freezing warehouse like a heartbeat she'd left behind, timed to fire only when her own had stopped. I clicked the video. Opal appeared on screen sitting in our home study in the green sweater I'd given her for our 30th anniversary. The lighting was soft, late afternoon sun through the window behind her. Her face carried a weariness I recognized now, but had misread then as illness. It wasn't sickness. It was the exhaustion of someone carrying a secret so heavy it bent their spine. "Leland," she said, looking directly into the camera with those brown eyes I'd loved for 48 years. "My love. If you're watching this, it means the mechanism worked. It means our neighbors are safe." She folded her hands in her lap, the same gesture she used when explaining something difficult. "I'm so sorry I couldn't tell you while I was alive. I'm sorry I had to lie to you these last 2 years. But if I'd told you what I found, you would have confronted him, and he would have buried everything deeper, or worse." My chest tightened. "Start with the folder called Twist 1, she continued. "I need you to see what our son has been doing before I can explain why I had to build this alone. I need you to understand the scope before I tell you how deep it goes." She smiled then, sad and small. "I love you, Leland. I'm sorry I carried this without you, but you're the only person I trust to finish it." The video froze on a static frame, her eyes looking directly through the screen into mine. The folder labeled Twist 1 glowed in the directory tree waiting. My hand hovered over the trackpad knowing that whatever I was about to see would rewrite 41 years of believing I knew my own son. I clicked the folder labeled Twist 1, and the Excel spreadsheet that opened made absolutely no sense at all. 23 rows, 23 names I recognized from the hardware store, the post office, the Sunday farmer's market. Helen Parker, who'd lived in the same Harborview cottage since 1967. Thomas Warren, who still walked his golden retriever past my shop every morning at 7. Margaret O'Sullivan, whose grandson had fixed my truck last winter. Every single one of them had an investment account managed by Remy. I scrolled right, reading the transaction history column by column, monthly deposits, quarterly dividends, annual summaries. Helen Parker's account showed $280,000 with an 8.4% return last quarter. Thomas Warren, $220,000, growing at 9%. Margaret O'Sullivan, $310,000, 12% returns. Every account showed profits, consistent steady growth, not a single cent stolen. I stared at the numbers until they blurred. This wasn't fraud. This was portfolio management. This was my son doing exactly what I'd always believed he did, helping our neighbors build secure retirements. Every client was in the black. Every investment showed healthy returns. "What are you showing me, Opal?" I whispered to the empty warehouse. Remy has been making these people rich. I scrolled to the bottom, looking for the trap I knew had to be there, but the summary cell showed total assets under management $6.2 million. Total client profits over 3 years, $740,000. Average annual return, 11.3%. These weren't victims. These were success stories. Relief flooded through me for exactly 14 seconds. Then Opal's video auto-resumed on the screen, her face appearing in a small window at the corner of the spreadsheet. "I know what you're thinking, my love," she said, and her expression held no relief at all, just that same bone-deep weariness. "You're thinking I made a mistake. You're thinking our son is innocent." She folded her hands, and I could see them trembling slightly. "Keep reading," she said. "Open Twist 2. The folder icon glowed at the bottom of the screen. My hand didn't want to move, didn't want to take away this one moment of hope that maybe I'd misunderstood. Maybe Remy was exactly who I'd always believed him to be. I clicked Twist 2. An audio file opened, and Opal's voice filled the warehouse, echoing off concrete and corrugated steel. "The interest payments aren't profits," she said, calm and methodical, like she was reading a grocery list. "They're bait. Every cent the Remy paid out to our neighbors, all $740,000, he borrowed from Marsden Sinclair's offshore credit line at 24% annual interest." My breath stopped. "The total borrowed amount is $15 million, she continued. "Marsden funded the entire operation through a Cayman Islands investment vehicle. The interest alone compounds to nearly $4 million over 3 years. I stood so fast the folding chair clattered against the concrete. The 12-page trust investment agreements that Remy had each client sign, the ones explaining how their profits worked, contain a clause on page 9, paragraph 4, subsection C. It makes them principal trustees of the underlying fund. That's a legal term, Edgar. It means when the fund defaults, they're not investors. They're guarantors. How do you process that? Your son didn't just rob your neighbors. He fed them just enough to make them trust the hook before he buried it in their hearts. The dummy, LLC, that holds all the debt is called Harbor Watch Coastal Residences. Opal's voice continued relentless. It's registered in Delaware with Remy and Marsden as managing directors. On November the first 30 days from when you're hearing this, they file Chapter 7 bankruptcy. The fund collapses. The debt transfers to the principal trustees. I couldn't breathe. Couldn't think past the numbers screaming in my head. 23 families, she said, and her voice finally cracked. 23 of our neighbors will wake up on November 2nd legally responsible for $15 million in defaulted offshore debt. The bankruptcy court will grant seizure orders within 72 hours, foreclosure sales within 30 days. The warehouse spun. Marsden Sinclair's development company gets first right of refusal on all foreclosed coastal properties. He'll buy every single parcel for 10 cents on the dollar. Helen Parker's Harbor Cottage, Thomas Warren's family land, Margaret O'Sullivan's 3 acres overlooking the bay, all of it. Prime coastal real estate that's been in these families for generations, sold at auction for fractions of market value because the owners will be drowning in debt they never knew they carried. I grabbed the laptop, fingers shaking so hard I nearly dropped it. "Is when Remy," Opal said, her voice steady again, surgical, receives a 15% finder's fee on the acquisitions. $2.1 million for delivering his own community to slaughter. The audio file ended. Silence filled the warehouse like a physical weight. My breath came out in visible clouds. The laptop's fan whirred. Somewhere outside, a gull cried over the harbor, where 23 families were about to lose everything they'd spent lifetimes building. 30 days, 1 month. And my son had engineered it all with the precision of a watchmaker building a time bomb. I opened the 3rd folder with hands that no longer felt like mine. High-resolution scans filled the screen. Legal documents, each one bearing official seals and notary stamps. Power of attorney. Co-guarantor agreement. Deed transfer authorization. Investment partnership letter. Every single one signed by me. My signature perfect down to the slight leftward hook on the capital L, the way the tail of the D always dropped below the line. Documents dated from 2 years ago, the exact week I'd been under anesthesia for emergency gallbladder surgery. The week I'd been unconscious for 7 hours, while my son sat in the hospital waiting room, telling nurses he'd stay, until I woke up, that he wouldn't leave his father's side. The screen's blue glow reflected off the warehouse walls as I stared at my own forged signature on papers that would make me look like the mastermind. That would make me the co-conspirator in destroying 23 families while I slept, dreaming nothing, trusting everything. The forensic handwriting analysis Opal had commissioned was meticulous, clinical, and absolutely damning. Every signature was mine, and none of them were. I scrolled through the scanned documents in the warehouse's dim light. Power of attorney granting Remy complete financial authority. Co-guarantor agreement binding me as primary backer for $12 million. Deed transfer moving my clock shop into a shell corporation. Authorization letter to Bank of Maine releasing account access to third parties. Opal's forensic report sat in a subfolder commissioned from a Boston handwriting expert. The conclusion appeared in bold. All 4 signatures demonstrate advanced forgery techniques. Authentic pressure patterns absent. Documents created February 2021. February 2021. Opal's handwritten margin note, exact week of your gallbladder surgery. You were unconscious. 7 hours on an operating table. 7 hours while Remy sat in the waiting room, holding my hand, before they wheeled me away promising he'd be there when I woke. He had been there, smiling, bringing water, adjusting pillows. He'd waited until I was unconscious and helpless to forge documents that would destroy me. She knew this all along, I whispered. That's why she built the USB, not just to expose him to save me. Without this evidence, I faced 15 to 25 years in federal prison. With it, I was a victim. The difference sat on a black USB drive in my coat pocket that Remy would kill to find. I drove home at 2 a.m. with the laptop hidden under my bench seat and the USB in my sock. Managed 4 hours of sleep before the knock came at 8. Police Chief Sayomara Delaney stood on my porch holding a white bakery box and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I wanted to check in on you's land, she said, stepping inside before I could decide whether to invite her. Your heart. Are you managing the stress, okay? I'm fine, I said. Is Remy staying in town to help? She set the pastries on my counter. Must be hard for you being alone after Opal. Her questions felt calculated data gathering, rather than comforting. Her eyes tracked to the hallway to the kitchen window, overlooking my workshop. I'm holding up fine, Chief, I said. Thank you for the concern. Her phone buzzed on the counter. She reached for it quickly, but my clockmaker's eyes, trained to catch the smallest gear movements, caught the caller ID before she flipped it face down. JW. The initials meant nothing to me then. The FBI would later show me Remy's encrypted contact list, every name replaced with 2 letters. Every identity buried behind initials only he and Sayomara would recognize. JW was Remy. It had always been Remy. She smiled, tucked the phone away, and stood. If you need anything, she said, heading for the door, the department is here for you. You think you can trust your local police chief to protect you from a criminal. You don't expect her to be sitting in your kitchen eating your pastries while texting the criminal who's destroying your community. 30 minutes after Sayomara left, Remy walked into my clock shop using his own key. Dad, I can stay here a few days, he said, setting his briefcase on my workbench. Help you manage the books. You shouldn't be dealing with business right now. His mouth said concern. His eyes said something else. They scanned the workshop with systematic precision, shelf seams, wall panel edges, floor plank gaps. He was cataloging, auditing, looking for something specific. I appreciate that, son, I said. But I've been running this shop 50 years. The books can wait. You sure? He crossed to the window. I don't mind staying. When he turned back, I saw it again. The same chalk dust on his trouser hem, but fresher now than at the funeral. He had been inside the compartments a second time. He moved through my workshop like a man surveying land he was planning to foreclose on, measuring every corner, calculating every asset, deciding what was worth keeping and what could be demolished. Get some rest, he said finally, crossing to kiss my cheek. I'll check in this evening. His lips were cold. I stood very still after he left, listening to 200 clocks tick in synchronized chorus, staring at the faint white chalk residue his shoes had tracked across my floor. The tracks led from the front door straight to the antique grandfather clock cabinet. Not to my workbench, not to my office, not to the filing cabinets. To the grandfather clock. The one my father Harold built in 1957. The one he'd constructed with hidden compartments in the base, framing sealed behind panels requiring specific pressure points to open. The one he'd told me about once, 2 weeks before his stroke, making me promise never to open it until I understood why. I'd never opened it, Never understood. Forgot about it for 40 years while I ran the shop and raised a son and loved a wife who died keeping secrets. But Remy hadn't forgotten. He'd been here before the funeral, maybe during it, forcing entry into compartments I'd left sealed for 6 decades. There was only one way he could have known the compartment existed: Sinclair. Marsden Sinclair's father had known Harold personally, had been in this shop, had watched my father work. Whatever Mihai Vance had seen or been told, he had passed it to his son, and his son had filed it away for decades, waiting for the moment it would be useful, searching for something my father had hidden. Something Remy was hunting with the same cold precision he'd used to hunt our neighbors, forge my signature, while I lay unconscious and coordinate with the police chief who was supposed to protect us. I knelt at the grandfather clock's base, running my fingers along carved oak panels, feeling for the pressure points my father had shown me once so long ago. The first panel clicked open. White chalk dust covered the inside edges. Fresh, recent. Remy had been here. But whatever my father had hidden, whatever Remy had been searching for, was still there, waiting in the dark. Inside the grandfather clock's hidden compartment beneath fresh chalk dust, I found nothing but empty space where something had once been. Whatever Harold had hidden there, it was gone, either taken by Remy or removed by my father decades ago, for reasons I'd never know. I closed the panel and left the mystery sealed. I drove to Mildred Ramsey's house on nothing but the memory of her eyes at the funeral, the way she'd watched my son, like a woman cataloging evidence for a case she'd been building in silence. Her Victorian home on Harbor View Street sat 3 blocks from the water, painted dove gray with white trim and flower boxes that still held October mums, despite the coastal wind. She answered the door before I finished climbing the porch steps like she'd been watching through lace curtains. "I've been waiting for you to come, Leland," she said, stepping aside to let me in. "Opal said you would eventually. She said you'd know who to trust when the time came." The living room smelled like Earl Grey tea and furniture polish. She poured from a china pot into cups that looked older than both of us, then sat across from me in a wingback chair that had probably witnessed 70 years of harbor storms through those tall windows. I was chief forensic accountant for Maine Trust Bank before retiring. She said, her voice steady and clinical. 13 years retired now. I spent 32 years tracking money that people tried very hard to hide. She set her teacup down with a soft clink. Opal walked into my home 18 months ago with property records that didn't add up, tax assessments that had been quietly amended, trust agreements filed with the county clerk that contained language she'd never seen in standard estate planning documents. I set down my own cup before my shaking hands spilled it. She asked me to audit the contracts, Mildred continued. Not officially, I have no legal standing anymore, but she needed someone who understood complex financial instruments. Someone who could read 12 pages of legal language and find the trap hidden in paragraph 4, subsection C. She stood cross to an antique secretary desk and opened a hidden panel I wouldn't have known existed. Inside sat a wall safe. She spun the combination from memory and pulled out a thick manila envelope. 23 contracts, she said, sliding it across the coffee table. Every name on them a neighbor of ours. I spent over a year documenting every fraudulent clause, every liability transfer, every trap your son buried in language designed to look like standard investment agreements. I sat in her Victorian parlor drinking tea from porcelain cups, older than Remy, realizing my wife had spent her final year building an army I didn't know existed one retired accountant at a time. "Why didn't you go to the police?" I asked. "With what standing?" She folded her hands in her lap. "I'm a retired accountant with no official capacity. The victims don't even know they're victims yet. They think they're making money. But you, Leland, you're different. Your signature was forged. You're the primary identity theft victim. You have federal standing to file a criminal complaint before a magistrate." She leaned forward. "Opal said to give these to you when the time came to finish what she started," she said. "That time is now. You have 27 days before those foreclosure mechanisms trigger. 27 days to stop what's coming." I left her house at 4 in the afternoon, with the manila envelope and a clarity I hadn't felt since before Opal died. Drove home, didn't sleep, sat at my kitchen table running calculations until the sun came up. At 7:30 on day 3, I idled my Ford F-150 outside Harbor Watch Police Station, staring through sea fog at institutional yellow lights glowing inside the brick building. My breath fogged the windshield. The USB drive sat in my coat pocket like a loaded weapon. The calculations were precise. I'd seen JW on Xiomara's phone, so she was compromised. The closest FBI field office was Portland, 2 hours away, with no direct contact information. I had the USB 23 contracts from Mildred and exactly 27 days before the foreclosure mechanisms would execute automatically. I needed a law enforcement official to physically take the USB to establish an official locked record. Needed to make a direct line to federal authorities while documenting everything in a way that couldn't be erased. Opal's video had been explicit. The USB possessed an internal self-defense protocol. The police station looked like every small-town brick building that's supposed to represent safety and order, until you realize the chief inside has been texting your criminal son while sitting in your kitchen eating pastries she brought to earn your trust. But I wasn't walking in there blind. Wasn't walking in there trusting Xiomara to do the right thing or hoping she'd magically become honest when confronted with evidence. I was walking in there because Opal had built this USB for exactly this scenario. Had recorded her video knowing I'd eventually be sitting in a truck outside a corrupted police station, trying to decide whether to trust a system that had already failed. She didn't leave me a weapon and expect me to be afraid to use it, I whispered to the fogged windshield. She left me a weapon and expected me to walk into the room and let it do its job. I gripped the USB through my coat pocket. 27 days. Xiomara is compromised, but Opal built this trigger for exactly this moment. I'd repaired clocks for 50 years. I knew the difference between a mechanism that was broken and one that was waiting to be triggered. I knew how to recognize a trap that had been designed not to catch you, but to catch the person who thought they were catching you. I cut the engine, slipped the USB deep into my coat, and walked firmly across the parking lot toward the heavy glass doors. I wasn't walking in there out of naive trust. I was walking in there as an active chess player executing Opal's blueprint, fully aware I was entering a trap, but counting on the trap to spring in the opposite direction from what my son expected. I pushed through the door into the institutional warmth of the station, the USB drive a cold weight in my coat pocket, knowing that in the next 15 minutes, either Opal's mechanism would fire exactly as she'd designed it, or I'd just handed my son the only weapon I had left. Xiomara looked up from her desk, and the smile she gave me was the kind people wear when they think they've already won. The conference room door locked from the outside, with a deadbolt click so final it could have been a casket sealing shut. Xiomara had been professional right up until that moment. Led me into the small conference room with its frosted glass window and metal table bolted to the floor, listened intently as I explained I had evidence of fraud, took detailed notes on a yellow legal pad, asked careful questions about dates and amounts. Then I'd place the black USB drive on the table between us. "I'll just retrieve the proper evidence logging forms, Mr. Finch," she'd said, standing smoothly. "One moment." She stepped out. The deadbolt echoed through the empty hallway. I sat very still, counting my heartbeats, listening to the station's sounds through thin walls. Radio chatter, a phone ringing, someone making coffee in the break room. 15 minutes later, the lock turned. Marsden Sinclair walked in first. 58 and polished as his yacht's teak deck, he moved into that conference room like a man who owned the building, never acknowledging that my father had saved his father's life 40 years before he tried to destroy mine. Behind him came Quentin Webb, 54, in a slate-gray suit, worth more than most cars, carrying his leather briefcase like a weapon he'd practiced wielding in 100 corporate war rooms, just like this one. Webb was Sinclair's personal attorney, and I would learn later already retained by Remy as criminal defense counsel the moment the live stream went public. Then Remy stepped through the door. Our eyes met for exactly 2 seconds. His face showed nothing. Not guilt, not anger, not even curiosity, just the blank professional mask of a man conducting business. Sinclair sat across from me, sliding a fresh stack of documents across the metal table. The paper made a whisper-soft sound that filled the small room. "Mr. Finch," he said, his voice carrying the smooth cadence of a man who'd spent decades negotiating deals. "The USB device you brought in is being digitally wiped as we speak. There's nothing left for you to fight with. The alternative is a multi-million-dollar fraud indictment bearing your signature. Your son has been exceptionally thorough." Webb opened his briefcase, extracted a pen, set it precisely parallel to the document stack. "Asset transfer documents," Sinclair continued. "Sign them. The clock shop, your retirement accounts, the small property holdings. Everything transfers to a trust that will manage your affairs while you adjust to recent events. This ends quietly. You live out your remaining years without criminal prosecution. Remy slid the pen toward me, across the cold metal table, the same motion he'd used 1,000 times as a child, asking me to sign permission slips for field trips and summer camps. This time, he was asking me to sign away my freedom. "I'm not signing anything," I said, keeping my voice steady. "And neither is the USB." Sinclair's smile didn't reach his eyes. "The USB is being erased, Mr. Finch. Chief Delaney is executing a standard digital wipe at the main terminal as we speak. Whatever your late wife compiled, it's being reduced to random zeros and He stopped. Through the frosted glass, I could see Xiomara at the main tech terminal, the USB plugged into the left port. Her hand moved across the keyboard. The monitor visible through the glass flashed black for 3 seconds. Then bold white text filled the screen large enough to read even through the frosted barrier. Evidence protocol activated. Xiomara leaned closer to the screen, her body language shifting from confident to confused to alarmed in the span of a heartbeat. Her hand moved to the keyboard again, typing frantically. The monitor split into 4 quadrants. Top left live video feed of this conference room. I could see myself sitting at the table, Sinclair across from me, Remy standing by the door. Top right, scrolling text, listing 23 names each with contract details. Bottom left, bank transaction records. Bottom right, a view counter. 7 views, 40 views, 200 views. Below the quadrants, white text, streaming to Facebook/Martha Callahan, YouTube/Martha Callahan, FBI Boston Field Office, Maine Attorney General, Portland Press Herald. The view counter didn't climb, it exploded. 1,400, 3,200, 7,800. Harbor Watch had a population of 3,200. Every single person in town was watching Martha Callahan's live stream of their police chief standing frozen at a terminal while real-time evidence of fraud scrolled across their screens. Marsden Sinclair stood so fast his chair crashed backward. "Kill the power!" he screamed at Xiomara through the glass. "Disconnect the network. Pull every cable out of that machine." Xiomara yanked the Ethernet cable. The stream didn't stop. She pulled the power cord. The screen stayed lit. The USB had its own embedded cellular connection, bypassing every local network and firewall the station possessed. Remy's hands started shaking. He stared at the monitor at the view counter, climbing past 12,000, watching his mother's profile picture in the corner of the stream, the photograph I'd taken of her on our 35th anniversary. Martha Callahan was trending in a town that had just buried Opal Finch. Webb grabbed his briefcase, already moving toward the door. We need to... Sinclair couldn't finish a sentence watching the numbers climb. "How is it?" "Facial recognition," I said quietly. All 3 of them turned to look at me. "The USB's Python script. It detected your faces through the terminal camera, all 3 of you. That's what triggered the broadcast protocol. A cybersecurity contact of Dr. Gallagher's built it, designed through his introduction, though he never knew its full purpose." I stood slowly, my legs steadier than I'd expected. "My wife spent 18 months building a bomb," I said. "You just volunteered to set it off." In the distance cutting through the morning harbor, fog federal sirens began wailing. Not 1, not 2. 3 distinct vehicles, maybe 4, coming fast from the direction of the coast road. Through the frosted glass, I watched Xiomara yank more cables in pure panic. While the view counter hit 15,000 and kept climbing, the stream was regional, now spreading through coastal Maine like wildfire. News stations would pick it up within minutes. The evidence was public, permanent, irreversible. Remy's face had drained of color. He finally understood what I'd known walking through that station door his mother had outplayed him from, beyond the grave, using his own arrogance as the trigger mechanism. The sirens were close enough now to distinguish individual vehicles. 4 of them, maybe 5, coming fast. And we were all still locked in a conference room with a view counter climbing toward 20,000, while Opal's evidence streamed to every screen in 3 counties. The conference room door didn't open. It exploded inward as 3 tactical agents in body armor swept through with FBI Special Agent Diane Kowalski leading the breach. 47, all tactical efficiency and no wasted motion, she moved through that doorway like she'd been waiting months for exactly this moment. Later, I learned she had been. "Mr. Finch," she said, extending a hand to help me stand. "You're free to go. These gentlemen are being held for field interrogation." Remy stood against the far wall, Hand's visible face completely blank. Sinclair had Webb whispering urgently in his ear, already building whatever legal fortress they'd need. Xiomara Delaney, Kowalski said into her radio, leading me into the hallway. Badge and service equipment confiscated. Emergency administrative suspension effective immediately. I watched through the main room's window as 2 agents removed Xiomara's equipment from her desk. She didn't resist, just stood there with that same professional mask she'd worn bringing pastries to my kitchen. Kowalski walked me toward the station exit, her hand light on my elbow. Whoever engineered that USB drive just saved us months of grand jury work, she said. We've been tracking Sinclair's offshore shell entities for 8 months. Federal wire fraud, RICO conspiracy, elder financial exploitation across state lines. We were just missing the Anchor Trust documents, the actual signed contracts showing the liability transfers. She pushed through the glass doors into cold October air. Your wife's USB provided them via certified mail duplicate, she continued. That's pristine chain of custody. Every document tagged with creation metadata, forensic hash verification, the works. This wasn't amateur hour, Mr. Finch. Someone knew exactly what they were building. Where is my son? I asked. Kowalski's expression shifted. We are confirming his location now, she said, turning back toward the parking lot. Then into her radio. Sedan registered to Remy Finch is missing from backlot. Black Audi main plates. All units consider subject flight risk. Repeat flight risk. You think the hardest moment is watching federal agents handcuff your son. You're wrong. The hardest moment is when they tell you he's already gone, and you realize you have to be the one to find him before he does something irreversible. Sinclair keeps his yacht at the old industrial pier, I said. If Remy's running, that's where he'll go. Kowalski's eyes sharpened. She reached for her radio again, already coordinating tactical units for harbor perimeter. I didn't wait for her response. Slipped out the station side door while she was calling positions to her team, her voice fading behind me as I moved toward the waterfront access road. I didn't run. Couldn't run. 63 years old with a heart that had needed surgery 2 years ago doesn't leave much room for sprinting, but I walked fast measured pace following the 400-meter harbor pathway that wound through industrial warehouses toward the old commercial pier. Dense morning fog had rolled in off the Atlantic, dropping visibility to less than 20 meters. The world became white murk and distant sounds. Wooden handrails wet with condensation under my grip. Marine diesel thick in the air, mixing with salt and rotting kelp. Commercial foghorns moaning somewhere in the invisible distance. I paused twice to steady my breathing hand, pressed against damp wooden pilings, feeling my pulse hammer against my ribs. Every step on that fog-soaked pier burned in my chest, not from the cold Atlantic air, but from the knowledge that I was 63 years old, chasing a ghost through the mist. And if I didn't reach that yacht in time, the ghost might be my son's future. The harbor crown materialized through the white like a dream turning solid. High-end yacht, 42 feet. Teak deck gleaming even through the fog. Deck lights cutting yellow circles in the murk. Diesel engines idling heavy, that low industrial pulse you feel in your bones before you hear it. Remy's Audi sat 20 meters back in the gravel lot. Driver's door still open, engine running. I moved closer to the yacht's aft deck, my shoes making no sound on the wet planks. Then I heard them. Voices from the main cabin, muffled by walls and fog, but unmistakable. Remy's voice high and desperate words unclear, but tones screaming. Sinclair's low, furious roar cutting through deeper threatening. Violent argument, something crashing, more shouting, then sudden absolute silence. The kind of silence that fills the space where sound used to be, where your brain keeps expecting the next word, the next crash, and gets nothing. Then a single sharp sound cut through the fog, absorbed almost instantly by the mist and the lap of water against pilings as if the harbor wanted to swallow what had just happened. The sound punched through the white air and died almost instantly, swallowed by mist and water. No echo. Just that single crack, and then the gentle lap of harbor water against pilings, indifferent, as it always was, to what happened above. I stood 3 meters from the aft deck in the white murk, my pulse roaring in my ears, knowing that in the cabin beyond that teak door, someone was dead and my son was holding the weapon. The only question was whether he'd fired it in cold calculation or desperate self-defense. The yacht's deck lights kept cutting their yellow circles through fog. The engines kept their steady diesel throb. Somewhere behind me on the access road, I heard tactical vehicles approaching their sirens, muted by distance and weather. But here on this pier in this moment, it was just me and a locked door, and the knowledge that whatever I found on the other side would rewrite the last 41 years one final time. I stepped onto the aft deck. The teak was slick with condensation. Through the cabin's porthole window, I could see movement inside a shadow, shifting darker than the fog. My hand reached for the cabin door handle. It turned easily, unlocked. I pushed it open and saw what my son had done. I stepped onto the aft deck and saw Marsden Sinclair lying motionless on the teak planks, a single wound in the center of his chest, and my son standing 3 meters away, holding the weapon that had ended it. Remy's face showed no panic, no remorse, just pure tactical assessment, like a mechanic evaluating an engine that had stopped running. The weapon hung loosely in his right hand barrel, pointed at the deck. His breathing was steady. His clothes showed no signs of struggle. This hadn't been a fight. It had been a calculated, deliberate act. I never planned to run with him. Remy said, his voice calm and analytical. The moment the live stream went up at the station, I routed our shared shell company accounts into crypto cold storage, untraceable. Then I drove here knowing Sinclair would follow. He'd want to coordinate a legal defense pool resources, present a unified front. He glanced down at Sinclair's body without expression. Remove Sinclair, blame everything on the man who can't defend himself. Claim he coerced me through threats. Simple, clean. He looked back at me. It would have worked, Dad, he said, without anger, without bitterness, just stating a fact. If Mom hadn't spent her last 2 years building a bomb inside a USB drive, he said it the way a chess player acknowledges a move they didn't see coming, professional respect for a strategy that had outplayed his own. Remy, I said, keeping my voice steady. Put the gun down. Not because the FBI is at the gate, because you are still my son and I am asking you. He let out a cold, hollow laugh that echoed off the fog-shrouded water. Am I, though? He said. Your son. You sure about that, Dad? He shifted his weight, the gun still hanging at his side. I found the DNA records when I was 16. Shop-safe hidden files in the back. Mother unknown transient woman died from exposure at Portland General, 1985. Father unknown transient. Adoptive parents Leland and Opal Finch. Closed adoption, all original records sealed. He thought the DNA would cut me. He thought revealing he'd known about the adoption for 25 years would sever whatever bond we had left. He didn't understand that I wasn't mourning the loss of a biological son. I was mourning the 41 years I'd spent raising a stranger who'd been performing humanity the entire time. Blood doesn't make you my son, Remy. I said, my voice steady and clear. 41 years of life did, and you chose to waste every single one of them. His expression didn't change. Whatever reaction he'd been hoping for, he didn't get it. Tactical lights cut through the fog from the pier, pinning us both in blinding white beams. FBI spotlights turning the yacht into a stage. Remy Finch. Kowalski's voice amplified through megaphone. Drop the weapon hands where we can see them. Wanda domed. Etatspeldes. I watched him run calculations in his head. Mathematical variables clicking into place. Armed resistance guaranteed the maximum federal sentence with no path forward. Cooperation bought the possibility of parole before 70. He lowered the weapon slowly, placed it carefully on the teak deck, and turned his back to look at the open water beyond the harbor mouth. He surrendered based entirely on logical calculation, not remorse. Tactical agents swarmed the deck in seconds. Remy's hands went behind his back without resistance. The handcuffs closed around his wrists with a sound like a clock mechanism locking into place, final, mechanical, irreversible. And I realized my wife had spent her last 2 years building this exact moment gear by gear, knowing I'd have to be the one standing here to witness it. Kowalski read the Miranda warning in full on the commercial pier, while early morning sun started burning through the fog. Formal charges entered into federal record felony murder in the first degree under Maine law, class a crime, unlawful death, occurring during commission of felony fraud. 23 counts, federal wire, fraud. 4 counts, forgery, RICO conspiracy. Back at the station, Zyomara was being arrested simultaneously. Accessory to fraud, abuse of official capacity, obstruction of justice. Marshals led Remy toward an armored SUV. He paused, locked his gaze on mine one final time. That same blank mask. Said nothing. Stepped into the vehicle. Beyond the security tape, 60 or 70 townspeople stood motionless. They had watched Martha Callahan's viral livestream, watched their police chief stand frozen at a terminal, watched evidence scroll past documenting how their trust had been weaponized against them. Helen Gidley, 74, a widow whose husband had built their coastal cottage with his own hands 40 years ago, approached with trembling hands and eyes that had watched the stream reveal everything she'd trusted the Finch name to protect. "It's a Leland," she said, her voice shaking. "Did we lose our homes? Did that boy take everything from us?" I looked directly at her. "Not if I can help it," I said. "I promise you, Helen, not if I can help it." But even as I said it, I knew the truth. The criminal case was won. Remy would spend decades in federal prison. Sinclair was dead. Xiomara would lose her badge and likely see prison time herself. But the 23 trust agreements were still active legal instruments, still ticking toward foreclosure, still carrying that automated execution date built into their digital infrastructure. Arresting my son didn't automatically void the contracts. The family still had less than a month before those foreclosure mechanisms would trigger, regardless of who was in handcuffs. The crowd parted silently as the federal SUV carrying my son disappeared down Harbor Road toward the county jail. I stood on that cold pier surrounded by 60 neighbors whose homes were still counting down to seizure. Kowalski approached, her face grim. "Mr. Finch," she said quietly, "the trust agreements are still active. We need to talk." She gestured toward the crowd. "The criminal case is won," she said, "but the civil war to save their homes is just beginning." The morning after my son's arrest, I woke to 43 voicemails, none from Remy. 22 from neighbors asking if their homes were safe. 14 from reporters wanting statements. 7 from lawyers offering representation I didn't need. 0 from the county jail. Kowalski called at 7, asking me to meet her at the Portland FBI field office. I drove north through October fog that turned the coastal road into gray nothing, trying not to think about where Remy had spent the night. She met me in a conference room with coffee that tasted like it had been burning since yesterday, and a legal briefing that felt the same way. Remy's being held without bail at Cumberland County Jail. She said, sliding a folder across the table. "Arraignment within 48 hours. He'll plead not guilty through counsel. Sinclair's commercial real estate holdings are frozen under federal asset seizure. Xiomara entered preliminary plea negotiations. Full disclosure for partial immunity. Likely 18 months house arrest, permanent badge loss." I nodded, trying to absorb information that should have felt like victory but didn't. "The criminal case is solid," Kowalski continued. "Felony murder charge, 23 counts, wire fraud, forgery, RICO conspiracy. With the USB evidence and live stream documentation, prosecution has everything they need." She paused and I knew what was coming before she said it. "But the trust agreements are still legally enforceable," she said. "Federal charges target the corruption, the fraud, the forgery, the conspiracy. They don't automatically void civil contracts. Those are separate instruments under state jurisdiction." I set down my coffee before I spilled it. "The automated foreclosure processes are coded into the trust documentation," she said. "Day 90 of delinquency is November 3rd, 27 days from now. If those agreements aren't frozen by a state court judge before that date, the title transfers execute regardless of who's in custody." The fog outside the window looked solid enough to walk on. "You're saying we won the criminal case but lost the Civil War," I said. "I'm saying you have to fight them separately," she replied. "And you're running out of time." I drove back to Harbor Watch with my hands gripping the wheel hard enough to ache, pulled into the clock shop lot to find Mildred's car already there. She was sitting at my workbench with her phone and a yellow legal pad covered in notes. "I called Vivian Hale," she said, without preamble. "Portland's top civil litigation attorney. She specializes in fraudulent conveyance cases. I've known her for 20 years. She's expensive, aggressive, and exactly what we need." She slid the legal pad toward me. "Her retainer is $18,500, Mildred said. "I've already organized a pooled community fund. We have $21,000 pledged. She can see us this afternoon." Vivian Hale's office smelled like old money and new leather law books from her father's practice chairs from this year's budget. Through 12-foot windows on the 12th floor of a converted textile mill, October light turned the Four Rivers silver. She poured coffee from a French press into cups that cost more than my weekly grocery bill. 62, with a silver bob and a navy suit that probably cost what I paid in property tax. She looked at the documents Mildred had brought and smiled like a shark recognizing dinner. I eat developers for breakfast, she said, her Yale Law 86 diploma watching from the wall behind her. Your son and his partner built themselves an elegant trap. Let's see if we can spring it backwards. She spread the trust agreements across her mahogany conference table, self-executing foreclosure clauses. She said, tapping paragraph 4, subsection C with a manicured nail. No human review required. On day 91, November 3rd, automated title transfer occurs via coded triggers embedded in the digital trust documentation. Even if a judge rules the whole scheme fraudulent 6 months from now, reversing 23 completed foreclosures takes years. And if Sinclair's estate sells those properties to third-party buyers before we can intervene, recovery becomes nearly impossible. She looked up at me. We need an emergency temporary restraining order from Maine Superior Court, she said. Freeze all 23 agreements pending fraud investigation. But emergency hearings require emergency filings, and the judicial calendar is backed up 3 weeks. We have one shot file by 5 p.m. this Friday to get an emergency slot. Miss that deadline, we're looking at regular scheduling that puts us past November 3rd. She pulled out a timeline on graph paper. Today is Tuesday, October 10th. We have 4 days to build an 847-page motion with 23 individual fraud exhibits, forensic accounting analysis, and legal arguments that will convince a Superior Court judge to grant extraordinary relief. Mildred opened her briefcase. And I have the forensic accounting, she said. Opal's complete audit trail. Every fraudulent transfer documented. Hale smiled. Then let's get to work. The next 4 days blurred into fluorescent-lit war room sessions that turned night into day. My hands cramped from highlighting contracts. Takeout containers stacked like a timeline marking hours that bled together. Mildred's audit spreadsheets covered one entire wall of Hale's conference room. Yet my phone buzzed on day 2. Kowalski. Arraignment tomorrow, 9 a.m., he pled not guilty. I set it face down and kept reading. Hale's paralegal printed exhibits until the copier overheated. We cross-referenced trust clauses against Maine statute, built causation chains showing how each signature was forged during my surgical anesthesia, documented Opal's investigation timeline, proving she'd discovered the fraud 18 months before her death. At 4:47 p.m. on Friday, October 13th, Hale's paralegal loaded the 847-page motion into a wheeled cart and sprinted 6 blocks to Cumberland County Superior Court. Hale and I watched from her office window as the paralegal disappeared around the corner toward the courthouse. And my phone buzzed at 4:53. As filed, the paralegal texted, "Clerk stamp 4:53 p.m., 7 minutes to spare." Hale poured us both whiskey from a crystal decanter. Now we wait, she said. Judge reviews the emergency motion, decides whether to grant a hearing. If yes, we get our day in court. If no, 23 families lose everything in 27 days. Through the window, the Fore River caught the late afternoon sun, indifferent to deadlines and desperate filings and families waiting to learn if their homes would survive the month. 7 minutes to spare, and everything riding on a judge we hadn't met, deciding whether our emergency was urgent enough to disrupt the calendar. The judge granted the emergency hearing for Monday morning, 3 days after we filed. The bailiff called my name, and I walked past 23 families who'd mortgaged their futures on my ability to tell the truth. Helen Gidley sat in the front row, hands folded in her lap like she was praying. Thomas Warren stood against the back wall because all the seats were taken. Every face I'd known for decades watching me walk to the witness stand in Maine Superior Court. Judge Margaret Collins, 61, and appointed in 2015, with a reputation for reading every exhibit personally, looked down from the bench with eyes that had seen 1,000 fraud cases and weren't impressed by anyone's story until the evidence backed it up. Vivian Hale led me through the timeline with surgical precision, the hospitalization, the gallbladder surgery, 7 hours under anesthesia, the documents bearing my signature dated to that exact week. Quentin Webb, 58, in a Brooks Brothers suit that screamed Boston money, rose for cross-examination with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. His accent carried that particular condescension that comes from Ivy League law schools and corner offices. "Mr. Finch," he said, adjusting his glasses. "You're 63 years old, correct?" "Yes." And you underwent major surgery 2 years ago. Significant trauma, medications, recovery period. Gallbladder removal, I said. Standard procedure. At 63, recovering from surgery, isn't it possible you simply misunderstood what you found? He gestured to the evidence table. These are complex financial instruments, trust agreements, offshore accounting. Perhaps you saw signatures and assumed, I can tell a counterfeit Swiss movement from genuine by sound alone, I said, keeping my voice steady. Spent 50 years listening to the difference between authentic mechanisms and forgeries. My signature is no different. I know what I wrote and what I didn't. Webb opened his mouth to continue, but Judge Collins raised a hand. I've read the forensic handwriting analysis, she said. Boston expert. $1,800 report. Mr. Finch's testimony is corroborated by professional documentation. Move on, counselor. The gavel crack sounded like a vault closing. Hale presented Mildred's forensic accounting, the USB evidence chain of custody. Opal's audit trail, documenting 18 months of investigation before her death. Every fraudulent clause highlighted in the trust agreements, every liability transfer exposed. Webb argued that freezing the foreclosures would damage Sinclair's estate creditors, that the emergency motion was premature, that civil remedies existed without court intervention. Judge Collins listened to both sides for 4 hours. Then she spoke. Emergency temporary restraining order granted, she said. All foreclosure proceedings against the 23 plaintiff families are hereby stayed for 90 days, pending full fraud investigation. Sinclair estate assets remain frozen. This court will reconvene for permanent injunction hearing December 15th. The gavel came down again. 90 days. 3 months. The automated system that would have executed in 27 days was frozen solid. Before I tell you what Xiomara's FBI confession revealed about Remy's 3-year game, are you still here? Comment A, if you think he planned this scapegoat from day one, or B, if he improvised when things went wrong, add one short reason why. Please note, what follows includes fictionalized details for emotional impact, but the core truth remains. I drove back to Harbor Watch in the Ford F-150 with the October sun setting over the harbor, trying to feel something that resembled victory. The families had their homes for another 90 days. The criminal case was proceeding. Remy sat in county jail awaiting trial. But something nagged at me. Something about Xiomara's role that didn't add up. Hale called me the next evening, while I sat in the truck overlooking Portland Harbor, watching fishing boats come in with their day's catch. Leland, she said, without preamble. I got the full FBI confession transcript from Xiomara's plea negotiation. You need to hear this. I put the phone on speaker and listened to her read. High school sweethearts, Hale said. Xiomara and Remy, 17 years old, Harbor High class of 1998. He left for college, dropped contact completely. She became a cop, worked her way up to chief over 23 years. Then, 3 years ago, Remy walks back into her life. Says he's coming home to help his aging parents. Promises they'll finally get that fresh start in Miami once he closes one last land acquisition deal. The sun turned the harbor water bronze. She loved him at 17, Hale continued. He used that for 24 years. I gripped the steering wheel. The morning the USB went live, Hale said, her voice going flat. Remy texted Xiomara a screenshot. Every email she'd sent coordinating with him about the trust agreements. Every text about keeping investigations quiet. Every communication over 3 years. All of it under her official police department signature, forwarded to offshore accounts she didn't know existed. Love as a 24-year con, the longest game my son ever played. He told her the entire paper trail pointed straight at her, Hale said. That if she didn't help him disappear, the USB evidence federal prosecutors would see a corrupt police chief orchestrating elder fraud while he was just a financial advisor following her instructions. He planned her fall before he even brought her back to Maine, I said. Every signature she thought proved their partnership was actually building her prison. Hale confirmed. Her plea deal, 18 months house, arrest 3 years probation, permanent badge revocation. She testified against him for partial immunity. I sat in the truck watching the harbor lights come on as darkness fell. Xiomara had been Remy's designated fall guy for 3 years. Every signature a brick in her own cell. Every email a piece of evidence against her if things went wrong. If he'd used a police chief that methodically burning her the second she became a liability, What did he plan for me? The USB drive sat in my glove compartment, the same one Opal had hidden in the hollowed-out album. I'd thought of it as her gift, her weapon, her bomb designed to expose Remy's fraud. But sitting there in the growing dark, I realized it was something else entirely. Opal's warning. Vivian's motion had bought us 90 days. The USB reframed as Opal's warning, rather than my crime, had shifted the narrative just enough. But the relief lasted exactly 9 hours. The FBI dossier arrived at 8 p.m., 47 pages on Marsden Sinclair's family history, with my father's name on page 12. I sat in the workshop under the pendant lamp, the same light my father had worked beneath for 40 years. Agent Kowalski had delivered the file personally, her expression unreadable. Page 12, she'd said. You'll want to read that part first. The document was clinical. Subject Mihai Vance, born Bucharest. 1948, emigrated 1969 under refugee status. Married 1973, son born 1975, changed surname to Sinclair 1976. But the attached memo, dated March 1970, typed on my father's old letterhead, told the real story. Mihai Vince had faced deportation, a technicality in his visa application, something about forged sponsor documents. ICE had scheduled his removal for April 15, 1970. He had a 6-month-old son, no family in Romania, no money for lawyers. My father had used the emergency fund, the same Diamond Reserve Opal had mentioned in her video, to hire an immigration attorney, pro bono, officially. The attorney's retainer, $8,500, the equivalent of $65,000 today. There was a handwritten note paperclipped to the memo, my father's fountain pen script. Some debts cannot be repaid. This is a gift, not a loan. Build a good life, Mihai. That's payment enough. Mihai Vance became Marsden Sinclair's father, built a modest accounting practice in South Portland, died in 2019, according to the dossier. I called Mildred. She answered on the first ring. You've read it, she said. Sinclair's father, I said. My father saved his entire family. There's more, Mildred said. Page 34. We found Mihai's diaries in Sinclair's yacht safe. He knew. I flipped ahead. The FBI had photographed diary entries Mihai's cramped handwriting, dated September 2018, 1 year before his death. I told Marsden today about Harold Finch, how he saved us when no one else would, how we would have been deported, how his mother and I would have been separated from him. Marsden said nothing, just nodded. I don't think he understood what I was trying to tell him, that gratitude matters, that some men are simply good. But Sinclair had understood. The next page showed a photocopy of that same diary entry this time, with a handwritten note in the margin. Sinclair's handwriting unmistakable. Gratitude is genetic defect of the week. 2 generations of kindness erased by a margin note. My father had given Sinclair's family a future, expected nothing, received nothing. And Sinclair had discovered this debt, this historical act of pure generosity and chosen betrayal anyway. Not in spite of what he knew, because of it. He kept the diary. I said, my voice hollow. He kept the proof of what my father did, and he destroyed us anyway. Sociopathy doesn't negate memory, Mildred said quietly. It negates conscience. He remembered. He just didn't care. I set the dossier down. My hands were shaking. Remy's arraignment is tomorrow morning, I said. 9 a.m. I know, Mildred said. I'll be there. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected. Federal District Court, Portland, Day 11. Judge Robert Danforth, presiding 64, appointed 2009 former federal prosecutor with a reputation for denying bail in violent felonies. His face was carved granite, his gaze surgical. Remy entered in an orange jumpsuit, wrists shackled. 41 years old. My son. He didn't look at me. Quentin Webb stood beside him, sleek and composed. The prosecutor, a woman in her 50s with steel gray hair, outlined the charges. Felony murder, first degree. Flight risk, due to undisclosed cryptocurrency holdings, estimated at $2.7 million. Webb made his argument. Your Honor, Mr. Finch has deep ties to the community. No prior criminal record. He's requesting bail in the amount of $2 million with electronic monitoring and surrender of all passports. The prosecutor countered. This is a capital offense, Your Honor. The defendant caused the death of an unarmed man on a private yacht. He has demonstrated sophisticated financial concealment access to liquid offshore assets and the technical capability to disappear. Under Main Rule 9A, he presents an unacceptable flight risk. Judge Danforth reviewed the file in silence. 30 seconds. A minute. Then he spoke. Bail is denied. The defendant is remanded to federal custody without bond pending trial. Next hearing is scheduled for December 3rd. Webb didn't flinch. Remy didn't react. But as the marshals moved to escort him out, Remy turned. For the first time since the yacht, he looked directly at me. His expression was completely blank. Not angry, not anguished, not defiant, just empty. I'd seen that look before on the faces of clients whose watches had stopped, whose heirloom clocks had ceased beyond repair. The moment they realized the mechanism was irretrievable, that no amount of skill or care could restore what had been lost. Except this time, I was the broken watch. And my son was the one deciding I wasn't worth fixing. The marshals led him through the side door. He didn't look back. Mildred touched my shoulder. We'll get him a psych eval. Webb's already filing for it. But I barely heard her. I kept replaying that stare, that void where recognition should have been. Sinclair had written that gratitude was a genetic defect, but what Remy had just shown me was worse. He'd looked at me, the man who'd raised him, taught him, loved him, and registered nothing. No hatred, no pain, no connection. The question wasn't whether he'd planned my destruction. It was whether he still considered me human enough to hate. The answer came the next morning in the chalk dust and silence. The chalk dust led to the false panel, behind the 1904 regulator. 3 taps, quarter turn, counterclockwise, and 46 years of family history opened in my hands. The compartment was narrow, lined with felt like a jeweler's tray. Inside a leather pouch, a folder of yellowed documents, and a sealed envelope marked in my father's handwriting, for Harold Jr. or Leland, when the questions come. I opened the pouch first. 17 uncut diamonds spilled onto my workbench, each the size of a thumbnail. Rough, pale, unremarkable to anyone who didn't know stones. But tucked beneath them were transaction receipts. Canadian Arctic Mines Limited, dated 1968 through 1972. Each diamond purchased legally logged with export permits tracked through customs. Not smuggled, not stolen, bought. The folder held a ledger. Refugee Assistance Fund, handwritten in my father's meticulous script. 37 names, dates, amounts disbursed, legal fees, travel costs, housing deposits. Line 14 confirmed what the FBI dossier had already told me, but reading it here in my father's own handwriting in his private compartment made it real in a way no FBI report ever could. And at the bottom of the folder, the State Department letter I now recognized from Kowalski's file, the same document, but this time in Harold's own hand. Not a government photocopy, the original. Creased from decades of folding, the ink slightly faded, but every word still clear. Civilian cooperating witness. Operation Amber Wave, legally obtained diamonds, no criminal liability. I'd read it once in an FBI report and understood the facts. Reading it here in my father's private compartment, surrounded by his careful handwriting and his decades of quiet sacrifice, I understood something else entirely. He had never needed anyone to know he was good. He had simply been good alone in the dark for as long as it took. Remy had spent years believing our name was built on crime. The truth had been sitting 3 taps away waiting for someone to ask. 43 years. He'd resented me for a legacy he'd been told was built on crime. Sinclair had whispered poison into his ear. Your grandfather was a smuggler, your family built on crime. And Remy had believed it because he'd never known the truth, because my father had hidden the proof behind a false panel and taken the secret to his grave. I looked at the diamonds scattered across my bench. 17 stones that saved 17 lives, recast as poison in my son's mythology. 37 refugees given futures, Mihai Vance given a son who would grow up to become Marsden Sinclair. And Sinclair had repaid that generational kindness with a lie that had torn my family apart. You built your entire war on a ghost, Remy, I said to the empty workshop. But he wasn't there to hear it, and even if he had been, I wasn't sure it would have mattered. The blank stare haunted me, the void where my son used to be. I placed the diamonds back in the pouch, folded the documents, put everything back in the compartment, and sealed it. Then I saw the second envelope, taped to the inside of the false panel door, nearly invisible in the shadow. It was addressed in Opal's handwriting, open after USB. I drove home. day 13. The house was still and cold. I sat at the kitchen table where Opal and I had shared 10,000 meals and opened the envelope. Inside a medical file, thin, maybe 12 pages. The first page was a cellular pathology report from Maine Medical Center, dated August 2021, 2 months after Opal's supposed diagnosis. I expected to see the markers. Stage 4, pancreatic adenocarcinoma, the same words her oncologist had used when he'd told us she had 6 months. But the report showed normal cellular profiles. No malignancy, no abnormal growth, healthy tissue. I flipped ahead. 3 more reports spanning 18 months, all clean. And then, paperclip to the back, a handwritten letter. Opal's script. Leland, the cancer was theater. I needed everyone, including you, to believe I was dying, so no one would suspect my investigation. A dying woman asks questions no one scrutinizes. A dying woman gets access to files, to accounts, to conversations people guard from the healthy. I obtained the pharmaceuticals from Dr. Morris Gallagher. He's 62, my primary care physician for 9 years, and he never knew what I was using them for. He thought he was managing my pain. I was managing everyone's perception. My hands went numb, and the stroke was real. 2 years of pharmaceuticals and stress took what the fake disease couldn't. I know what you're feeling right now, betrayed, angry, maybe relieved. I'm not here to face your reaction. But understand this, I chose it. Every injection, every false symptom, every lie I told you when you sat beside my bed and held my hand. I did it because Remy was destroying families and no one else was looking closely enough to stop him. The cancer gave me cover. It gave me time. And when the stroke came, I'd already finished what I needed to finish. I left you the USB. I left you the truth. Grieve it as a choice I made for the people I love. I set the letter down. My vision blurred. She'd lied to me for 2 years. Died from the lie. Called it love. Dr. Gallagher's name sat there on the page like an accusation. He'd given her the tools to fake her own terminal illness, never suspecting. And she'd used them to investigate our son while I'd sat beside her, helpless watching her fade. Except she hadn't been fading. She'd been working. 2 parents, 2 sacrifices built on opposite foundations. My father had saved lives with contraband that wasn't contraband. My wife had destroyed herself with cancer that wasn't cancer. Remy had inherited neither truth, only the weight of secrets we'd thought would protect him. Now the trial would unearth everything we'd buried, and I had no idea which revelation would destroy us first. The first revelation came at 7:30 the next morning, before the trial could unearth anything. I walked into Dr. Morris Gallagher's clinic with Opal's fabricated oncology file, and one question, did you know she was dying for real? His office was small. Diploma from Tufts, 22 years, serving Harbor Watch frame photos of patients he'd saved. 62 years old, silver hair. Steady hands that had written prescriptions for my family since Remy was a boy. He looked at me across the desk like a man who'd been expecting this visit for months. I knew, he said. I set the file on his desk, the clean pathology reports, the pharmaceuticals list, the 2-year deception. She told you, I said. Not at first. He opened the file, glanced at the pages without really reading them. At first I thought I was managing palliative care, pain management, symptom control, end-of-life comfort. She presented with all the markers, weight loss, fatigue, imaging reports from other facilities. I had no reason to question it. When did you know? He exhaled slowly. 8 months in. She came for a refill and I noticed discrepancies. The progression wasn't matching her symptom timeline. I confronted her, and she showed me everything. Everything, I repeated. Transaction records, forged trust documents, your surgical timeline cross-referenced with the first fraudulent transfers. He leaned back. 18 inches of evidence stacked in a folder she carried in like a briefcase. She said, I need you to make me disappear in plain sight. I need to become so terminal that no one suspects I'm investigating. I felt the air leave the room. You helped her, I said. I did. No hesitation, no apology. She was saving families, 23 of them by her count. And she was dying anyway, not from cancer, but from the toll of what she was doing to herself. The pharmaceuticals, the stress, the deception. I watched her cellular function decline in real time. The stroke didn't surprise me. It was inevitable. You watched her die from the pharmaceuticals you gave her. I watched her save 23 families, he said quietly. She made her choice. I made mine. The anger I'd carried into his office dissolved into something heavier. Shared grief. Complicity in a sacrifice I'd never been allowed to consent to. The medical board, I said. I surrendered my license voluntarily 2 weeks ago. The FBI contacted me during their investigation. They'd pulled pharmacy records from Opal's medical file as part of the asset fraud case. I told them everything before they could ask twice. 2-year suspension, $50,000 fine, no criminal charges mitigating intent they called it, helping a patient protect her community. He opened his desk drawer and pulled out a small USB drive, bone gray, the color of ash, the color of truth that burns everything clean. She asked me to give you this after the first USB went public, said you'd come looking for answers, and this was the last one she could give. He slid it across the desk. What's on it? I asked. I don't know, he said. She recorded it here in this office 3 days before the stroke, alone. I never watched it. I took the drive. It was warm as if it had been waiting in his hand. I'm sorry, he said, for what it's worth. I didn't answer. There was nothing left to say. I played the video at 10:45 that night alone in the workshop. The screen flickered, then steadied. Opal appeared sitting at our kitchen table. She wore the green sweater I'd given her for our 30th anniversary. Her face was thin, but her eyes were clear. Hello, my love, she said. My throat closed. If you're watching this, the USB worked. The investigation went public. The families are fighting back. She folded her hands on the table, the same gesture she'd used 1,000 times when explaining something difficult. I need you to understand the timeline. I found the first transaction 3 weeks after your surgery, buried in an account I'd been monitoring for estate planning. The transfer was small, $12,000, but the routing matched a pattern I recognized from audit work I'd done years ago. Layered, deliberate, designed to disappear. She paused, took a breath. I knew immediately what Remy was building, and I knew if I confronted him, he'd bury it deeper. So I became someone no one scrutinizes, a dying woman asking questions about her estate, her accounts, her son's financial future. The cancer had to be real enough to fool you. If you'd known, you would have tried to stop him yourself, and he would have seen you coming. Her voice stayed steady, but her hands trembled slightly. Dr. Gallagher discovered the deception 8 months in. I gave him the choice to walk away. He stayed. He's a good man, Leland. Don't punish him for helping me do what I needed to do. She leaned closer to the camera. The stroke was real. The toll was real. I don't regret it. I saved 23 families from losing their homes. I left you the evidence you need to stop him. And I need you to know every time I lied to you, every time you sat beside my bed, thinking I was fading from cancer, I was working, I was fighting, and I would do it again. Her voice, her face, her green sweater. 2 years dead and still giving orders. There is one more thing, she said, her tone shifting. Hidden in the base of the photo album, a final page I never showed you. Open it when you're ready, not before. She smiled soft and sad. I love you, Leland. Now, go fix the clocks. The screen went black. I sat in the silence for a long time. Then I stood, walked to the workbench, and picked up the album. It sat where I'd left it weeks ago, Hollow Center already violated, USB already revealed. But Opal said, base not, Hollow Center. I flipped it over. The felt backing had a corner loose I'd never noticed. One more thing she'd hidden. One more truth she'd died protecting. I peeled the felt backing carefully, afraid it would disintegrate in my hands. The felt came away in one piece, and underneath yellowed torn at 3 corners was the original album page I'd thought lost forever. The photograph was gone, removed years ago. But the page itself remained blank except for faint discoloration at the edges. I held it up to the pendant lamp. Nothing. Then I remembered my father's lessons. Invisible ink, lemon juice, oxidizes under heat. I retrieved the heat gun from the restoration bench used for softening old varnish, loosening frozen mechanisms. Set it to low, passed it slowly over the page. Brown writing appeared sentence by sentence in Opal's careful script. Check power of attorney against hospital admission codes from 2 years ago. You signed nothing. I kept heating. More words emerged. You were sedated, but Remy was in the house. My hands went cold. I set down the heat gun and pulled the hospital records from the drawer where I'd filed them months ago. Admission, October 12th, 2021, 6:15 a.m. Discharge, October 15th, 2021, 11 a.m. 72 hours under general anesthesia and post-surgical sedation for the valve replacement that had nearly killed me. Then I pulled the forged power of attorney documents, the ones Xiomara had used to create the fraudulent trusts. 14 signatures, all allegedly mine, all notarized, all dated within a 3-day window. October 12th through October 15th, 2021. Every signature, every document. 72 hours when I couldn't have signed my own name, much less complex legal instruments transferring fiduciary authority. The hospital log showed one visitor during that window, Remy Finch, son. October 13th, 2021, 2 p.m. to 8:30 p.m. 6.5 hours alone in the house while I lay unconscious 20 miles away. Opal had known. She'd cross-referenced the dates, confirmed the impossibility, and hidden the proof in oxidized ink on a page no one would think to heat. I wasn't a co-conspirator. I was a victim whose signature hand had been in a surgical recovery ward, while his son forged documents in the family workshop. The federal exposure evaporated. No criminal liability, no conspiracy charges. Just a father who'd been used while unconscious. I sat down heavily on the stool, the page still warm in my hands. Opal had given me exoneration from beyond the grave, one last gift I hadn't known I needed until the walls had already started closing in. 6 months passed between those discoveries, time enough for grief to harden into something I could carry to a witness stand. I taught financial literacy classes every Tuesday at the community center. 18 people, median age 63, learning to read trust documents and recognize red flags. I visited Remy once at the Cumberland County Jail, sat across from him in silence for 20 minutes. He never spoke. Neither did I. I donated my father's Operation Amber Wave files to the State Museum. 17 diamonds, 37 refugee names, proof that some legacies are built on salvation rather than sin. And then, April 2024, the trial began. Cumberland County Superior Court, Portland, Courtroom 3, larger than I'd expected. Oak-paneled walls, high ceilings, gallery seats filled with reporters, families, and the curious. Judge Margaret Collins, presiding, the same judge who'd granted the temporary restraining order 6 months earlier. Her face was impassive, her gavel precise. The jury sat in 2 rows, 7 women, 5 men, median age 54. Faces I studied for signs of sympathy or judgment and found only attention. Remy entered in a pressed blue suit, wrists uncuffed now that trial had commenced. 41 years old. My son. He walked past me without acknowledgement and sat beside Quentin Webb at the defense table. Vivian Hale sat 3 rows behind me, legal pad, open pen, ready. Mildred Ramsey sat beside her. Both had become fixtures in my life over the past 6 months, attorneys and auditors transformed into witnesses and friends. The prosecutor stood. ADA Rebecca Carlson, 47, Cumberland County's lead financial fraud specialist for 15 years. She had spent her career prosecuting elder exploitation cases, and her opening statement reflected that expertise. 23 families. She began, her voice clear and measured. 217 forged signatures, $15 million in fraudulent debt instruments. One man who knew exactly what he was building. She walked the jury through the timeline, the surgical window, the trust creations, the offshore accounts. The victim names: Carlotta Ben Louise, families whose mortgages had been weaponized while they believed they were protected. Then Webb stood for the defense. Yet Remy Finch, he said, was a son trying to save his father's legacy from a partner who exploited his trust. Marsden Sinclair, deceased beyond prosecution, beyond accountability, was the architect. Remy was the over-leveraged advisor who discovered the scheme too late and tried to contain the damage before it destroyed everyone he loved. It was masterful. Frame Remy as victim of the dead man who couldn't defend himself. Shift the blame to Sinclair, paint Remy as the son caught in a web he didn't weave. The jury listened. Some took notes. Others watched Remy's face, searching for remorse or defiance. They found neither. Across the courtroom, Remy sat with hands folded, watching the jury like a man tallying numbers, not lives. No remorse, no defiance, just calculation. Judge Collins addressed the jury after both opening statements concluded. Jurors, you will decide whether the evidence proves guilt beyond reasonable doubt. Nothing more, nothing less. She called first recess. 15 minutes. The gallery shifted, stretched, whispered. Webb leaned into Remy's ear, whispered something that made my son's jaw tighten. For the first time in 6 months, Remy looked directly at me, not through me at me, and the expression wasn't void anymore. It was calculation. That calculated look haunted me through day 2. The opening witness testimonies, Mildred's forensic breakdown of Opal's audit trail, the encrypted files presented one by one. The bailiff called my name on day 3, and I walked to the witness stand knowing the next hour would decide whether my son spent 3 decades in prison or walked free. Ada Carlson approached first. Her questions were precise, methodical. Timeline of the forgeries, hospital admission records, the 72-hour window when I'd been sedated and Remy had been alone in the house. Mr. Finch, when did you first become aware of the fraudulent power of attorney documents? October of last year, I said. After my wife's death, she left evidence showing the signatures couldn't have been mine. And your response? I verified her findings, cross-referenced hospital logs with notarization dates, confirmed impossibility. Carlson nodded. Why are you testifying today? I looked at the jury. 12 faces, some sympathetic, some skeptical. I'm here because my wife spent her final 2 years building an ironclad case I'm duty-bound to complete. Then Webb stood for cross-examination. Mr. Finch, isn't it true you have a significant financial interest in your son's conviction, that your own potential criminal liability hinges on framing him as sole perpetrator? No, I said calmly. The evidence eliminates my liability regardless of this trial's outcome. I'm here because 23 families deserve accountability. Webb shifted tactics. You visited your son once in 6 months. 1 visit. Does that sound like a father seeking justice or a father seeking vengeance? The courtroom went quiet. It sounds, I said slowly, like a father who sat across from his son and found no one home. No remorse, no explanation, just silence. Webb started to respond, but Carlson stood. Your Honor, the prosecution would like to introduce Exhibit 47C, audio recording recovered from Sinclair's yacht backup server. Judge Chen nodded. Proceed. Carlson played the file. The quality was tinny, compressed, but the voices were unmistakable. Remy's voice, old man won't understand what he signed. He just trusts me. Sinclair's laugh low and sharp. Genetic flaw, trusting your offspring. Remy again, by the time he realizes it'll be too late to unwind, the recording ended. The courtroom held its breath. Then Carlson introduced the encrypted texts recovered from Xiomara's confiscated phone. Messages between her and Remy dated 3 weeks before Opal's death. Remy's text displayed on the overhead screen. After asset transfer, Clear's old man won't need shop. Won't need anything anymore. Xiomara's reply, clarify. Remy, loose ends tied, clean exit. Won't need anything anymore. The implication landed like a detonation. Not just financial fraud, not just forgery. The text implied something far darker. The plan hadn't stopped at stealing my assets, it had extended to erasing me entirely. Jurors recoiled. One woman in the back row covered her mouth. The man beside her set down his pen, face pale. Remy dropped his head into his hands. Webb objected immediately. Speculation. Your Honor, the texts are ambiguous at best. Now, Cerise. Overruled, Judge Collins said. The jury will assess credibility. I stepped down from the witness stand 20 minutes later. Vivian caught my eye from the gallery, her expression grim. Mildred sat beside her, hands clenched. The prosecution rested its case that afternoon. Deliberations took 6 days. The jury asked for transcripts twice, reviewed the encrypted texts 4 times, requested clarification on the felony murder rule. Day 9, 4:15. p.m. they returned. The courtroom filled quickly. Reporters lined the back wall. Families filled the gallery. Carlotta in the 3rd row. Ben 2 rows behind her, Louise near the aisle. Faces I'd come to know over 6 months of pre-trial hearings and sidebars. The jury foreman stood, a man in his late 50s, wire-rimmed glasses, steady hands. Judge Collins addressed him. Has the jury reached a verdict? We have, Your Honor. Please read the verdicts. The foreman unfolded the paper. His voice was clear, deliberate. Count 1 wire fraud in the 1st degree guilty. Count 2 wire fraud in the 1st degree guilty. He continued through all 23 wire fraud counts. Everyone guilty. Count 24, forgery of legal instruments, guilty. Count 25, RICO conspiracy, guilty. Then the final charges. Count 26, felony murder in the 1st degree in the passing of Marsden Sinclair, not guilty. Webb exhaled audibly. Count 27, felony murder under Maine state law in the passing of Marsden Sinclair, guilty. The foreman sat. Judge Chen dismissed the jury with thanks, then turned to Remy. Mr. Remy Finch, you have been found guilty on 26 of 27 counts. This court finds sufficient aggravating factors, including elder exploitation, sophisticated financial schemes, and implied threats of physical harm to impose the maximum allowable sentence. She paused, her gavel resting in her hand. You are hereby sentenced to not less than 28, nor more than 35 years in federal confinement. Eligibility for parole after 20 years of flawless conduct. The sentence is to run consecutively for all fraud counts concurrently for felony murder. 28 years minimum. My son would be 69 when eligible for parole, older than I am now. Judge Collins continued. Co-defendant Xiomara Delaney's negotiated plea is finalized 18 months of house arrest, permanent revocation of notarial license and restitution in the amount of $75,000. Mildred reached over and squeezed my hand. I didn't squeeze back. I couldn't. No one cheered. Justice isn't victory. It's just accounting. The bailiffs led Remy toward the side door in chains. He turned once, looked straight at me with that same blank expression from the yacht. Nothing. No rage, no regret, no recognition. I'd spent 41 years raising a man who could look at me like I was furniture. The trial was over. The reckoning had just begun. The reckoning began with numbers, not emotion. 2 weeks after the verdict, the courtroom filled again, not for punishment this time, but for accounting. The same oak-paneled walls, the same gallery seats, but the atmosphere had shifted. No reporters, no crowd. Just the 23 families whose mortgages had been weaponized, their attorneys, and the federal agents who'd traced every hidden dollar. Judge Collins presided from the bench, her face composed. Vivian sat beside me in the front row legal pad, open but blank. Mildred sat one row back, hands folded in her lap. Agent Kowalski stood at the prosecution table, a thick binder open before her. She'd spent 6 months tracking cryptocurrency wallets, offshore accounts, and shell corporations. Now she delivered the final accounting. Your Honor, federal asset forfeiture proceedings have concluded. The total restitution fund combining seized cryptocurrency assets from Remy Finch and the forfeited estate of Marsden Sinclair amounts to $35.2 million. The number hung in the air. 35 million, more than I'd imagined they could recover. Judge Chen nodded. Agent Kowalski, please detail the distribution. Under the Mandatory Victims Restitution Act, every family on the victim list receives 100% principal restoration, plus applicable statutory interest calculated from the date of initial fraudulent transfer. This covers not only the stolen funds, but compensates for lost equity, missed investment opportunities, and documented financial harm. Kowalski turned to face the gallery. Remy Finch's cryptocurrency wallet yielded $4.2 million. Marsden Sinclair's seized estate, including the yacht at the Portland properties, and offshore accounts frozen during investigation, yielded $31 million. Combined, these assets exceed total victim losses by approximately $2.7 million. Vivian leaned toward me. Your wife built a case so tight they couldn't hide a single dollar, she whispered. Judge Chin consulted her notes. The court orders immediate payout to all 23 families under federal restitution guidelines. Several families will receive full debt discharge, resulting in permanent mortgage voiding, and deed transfer to clear ownership. She read the names. Carlotta Mendez, $487,000, restored mortgage voided. Ben Ashford, $623,000, restored land cleared. Louise Tran, $891,000, restored estate debt-free. 23 families, $35 million. Numbers that used to mean ruin now meant restoration. I watched the families as their names were called. Some cried, others sat in stunned silence. A few nodded as if confirming calculations they had run privately for months. Judge Collins concluded the hearing 45 minutes later. The ledger is settled. This court is adjourned. The gavel fell sharp and final. Outside, the May air was warm. Spring had arrived, fully cherry blossoms along Congress Street, tourists returning to the waterfront, the city moving forward as cities do. I stood on the courthouse steps with Vivian and Mildred, watching families disperse to their cars. Some shook hands with Kowalski. Others walked in silence, processing the closure that money provides when justice can't. Mildred adjusted her coat. She'd worn the same gray wool throughout the trial, practical and unadorned. She looked tired but lighter, as if a weight she'd carried had finally been set down. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the pocket watch. Harold's watch. Gold casing, Roman numerals. Inscription on the back, HF, 1968, time well spent. My grandfather had given it to my father the year he'd started Operation Amber Wave, the year he'd begun saving refugees with diamonds that weren't contraband. I held it out to Mildred. Opal wanted you to have this, I said, for keeping the ledger. Mildred stared at the watch, then at me. I can't. Harold would have approved, I said. You did what he did, protected people, counted what mattered, made sure the accounts balanced. She took the watch carefully, turned it over, read the inscription. Her fingers traced the engraving. She did the hard part, Mildred said quietly. I just counted what she found. You spent 2 years making sure every number held up in court. You testified. You cross-referenced forensic trails while the rest of us were still processing shock. Opal knew what you'd do before you did it. That's why she chose you. Mildred slipped the watch into her coat pocket, patted it firmly. She said nothing, but she squeezed my hand once hard, the way Opal used to when words weren't sufficient. Vivian stood beside us, her expression soft. 3 generations, she said. Harold saved lives. Opal saved homes. Mildred saved the accounting. That's a legacy. 3 generations, 2 women, 1 legacy finally clean. The watch ticked in Mildred's pocket, time, moving forward, not just counting losses. We descended the courthouse steps together. Vivian peeled off first, heading to her firm to file permanent injunction paperwork. Mildred walked me to my truck, parked 3 blocks away near the harbor. What will you do now? She asked. Teach, I said. Financial literacy classes start next week at the community center. 18 people signed up, most of them victims who want to make sure this never happens to anyone else. Mildred nodded. Opal would like that. And you? Back to audits, she said. Boring, predictable corporate audits where the worst scandal is someone expensing personal coffee. She smiled faintly. I've had enough fraud to last a lifetime. We stood by the truck. The harbor stretched beyond us. Boats returning gulls circling the water, moving as it always had. Thank you, I said. For what? For believing Opal when no one else was looking. Mildred's hand went to her coat pocket where Harold's watch rested. She made it easy to believe, she said. The evidence was ironclad. She turned and walked back toward her car, the watch ticking against her ribs like a second heartbeat. I watched her go. 23 families had their homes back. Remy had 28 years minimum, the ledger balanced. But that night alone in the workshop, I'd still have to decide whether to open the drawer where I kept his childhood photos or seal it shut forever. That night, I opened the drawer. Childhood photos, report cards, the baseball glove I'd bought for his 10th birthday. I didn't seal it shut. I left it open and drove to Warren the next morning. The guard led me through 3 steel doors and a metal detector to the ballistic glass booth, where my son waited in orange behind 2 inches of reinforced polymer. Remy looked different, leaner. Gray creeping at his temples, visible even through the smudge partition. 41 years old, 2 months into a sentence that would stretch longer than he'd been alive. He sat with his hands folded on the metal table posture, rigid. I sat down on my side of the glass, picked up the phone receiver. He picked up his. You came, he said. His voice was flat, careful. I did. Why? I reached into my jacket and pulled out a white legal envelope. Placed it in the transfer slot, a small drawer built into the partition for passing documents. Pushed it through to his side. I brought something you should have seen 41 years ago, I said. Open it now or after I leave. He stared at the envelope. What is it? The truth about who you are. Either way, I've made my peace. Remy's jaw tightened. He picked up the envelope, turned it over. The state forensic lab seal was visible on the back, official, irrevocable. He opened it. Inside, a certified DNA paternity report, processed 3 weeks earlier at my request. 3 pages of genetic markers, allele, frequencies, probability calculations. He read the first page, then the second. His face went pale. I watched him process the numbers. The conclusion typed in clinical block letters at the bottom of page 3. 0 genetic markers. Mother, unknown, transient deceased, Portland General Hospital, February 1985. Father, unknown transient. Adoptive parents, Leland Harold Finch and Opal Marie Finch closed, adoption, finalized March 12, 1985. He set the report down slowly, hands shaking. "You're not my father," he said. "Biologically, no." The silence stretched. 30 seconds? A minute? The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Somewhere in the corridor beyond, a steel door clanged shut. "You always knew?" he asked finally. "Your mother knew from the first hour," I said. "The adoption agency told us your biological mother had died from exposure complications 2 weeks after your birth. No family, no father listed. We signed papers agreeing never to disclose the adoption unless you asked directly. I never asked." "You never did." He picked up the report again, scanned it as if the words might change. "When did you find out?" 3 weeks ago," I said. "I requested the test after the trial. Needed to know if there was something genetic I'd missed. Some hereditary explanation for..." I gestured vaguely at the glass, the prison, the wreckage of our lives. "For all of this." "And..." "Nothing genetic," I said. "Just choices." Remy set down the phone, pressed his palms flat against the table. His shoulders rose and fell with controlled breathing. Then he picked up the phone again. "You could have left," he said, "after Mom died, after you found out. You could have walked away and never looked back." "I could have. But you're here." "I am. Why..." His voice cracked slightly. I leaned forward close enough to the glass that I could see my reflection overlapping his face. "Because you are my son," I said. "You always were. Biology doesn't make a father. 41 years of raising you, teaching you, loving you, that makes a father. And that's why what you did cut so deep. You didn't just betray a stranger. You betrayed the man who chose you." His face twisted. He turned away facing the cinder block wall. I kept talking. "Your mother and I walked into Portland General in February 1985 and signed papers agreeing to raise an infant with no past, no lineage, no guarantees. We didn't know if you'd be healthy or sick, easy or difficult, brilliant or struggling. We knew nothing except that you needed parents and we wanted to be them." His shoulders shook. "We chose you," I said. "Every day for 41 years we chose you, even when you hated the clocks, even when you resented the shop, even when you looked at me like I was an obstacle to overcome. We chose you." Remy turned back. His eyes were red wet, not the calculating void from the courtroom. Not the blank stare from the arraignment. Real tears, uncontrolled. For 41 years I'd watched him smile, rage calculate. Never this. Never grief. "I didn't know," he said, voice breaking. "I thought Sinclair told me you were using me, that the business was a trap, that I'd never be more than the clockmaker's son unless I broke free. And you believed him." I wanted to believe him. The tears ran freely now. Because it was easier than admitting I was just angry. Angry that you were satisfied with a small shop and a quiet life when I wanted... He stopped, swallowed. "When I wanted more..." More isn't wrong," I said. "The method was." He dropped his head into his hands. His shoulders convulsed. The sobs were audible even through the glass partition, raw and unorchestrated. I waited. Finally, he looked up. His face was blotched broken. "I'm sorry, Dad," he said. 2 words I'd waited months to hear. Maybe years. Maybe since the first forged signature. He pressed his palm against the glass. I matched it from my side, 2 hands separated by polymer and choices and 28 years. "I'm sorry, Dad," he said, again voice breaking. The guard tapped my shoulder. "Time's up." I stood, nodded once, and walked toward the steel door, knowing this might be the last time we ever touched even through glass. It wasn't the last time. I visited twice more in July, each conversation shorter, quieter. The 3rd visit, Remy asked about the shop. I told him it still kept time. 3 weeks after the first prison visit, I stood at the front of Harbor Watch Community Center, teaching 20 strangers how to spot the same fraud my son had perfected. The room was plain folding chairs, fluorescent lights, linoleum floors. 20 faces most, over 60 all victims or friends of victims. They'd come for the Tuesday evening session of Financial Defense for Seniors, a workshop Mildred and I had launched in late June. I stood beside a whiteboard covered in diagrams, trust structures, power of attorney templates, the anatomy of a reverse mortgage scam. "This is a redacted contract from the actual case," I said, holding up a photocopied document with names blacked out. "Notice the signature line. It says authorized representative, not homeowner. That single word difference allowed the fraudster to sign on behalf of people who never consented." Mildred sat in the front row forensic accounting textbook stacked beside her. She'd take over in 20 minutes to walk them through how to read bank statements for unauthorized transfers. Dr. Morris Gallagher sat in the back, his medical license suspended, but his expertise still valuable. He'd volunteered to handle questions about healthcare proxies and medical power of attorney, the documents Opal had used to maintain her fabricated illness. A man in the third row raised his hand. Carl Brennan, 61, local fisherman who'd lost his family's boat to one of Remy's fraudulent reverse mortgages. His weathered face carried the weight of 3 generations of fishing history, erased by forged paperwork. How are we supposed to trust anyone after this? Carl asked. Lawyers, accountants, even family. How do we know? The room went quiet. Everyone waited for my answer. You don't stop trusting, I said. You start reading fine print. Massive difference. Trust isn't blind faith. It's informed confidence. You trust people who show you the math, explain the clauses, answer questions without impatience. The moment someone rushes you or says, just sign here, that's when you stop. Carl nodded slowly. Others took notes. Teaching them to read fine print felt like teaching them to hear counterfeit ticking, same skill, different danger. I'd spent 40 years listening for the irregular beat that meant a mechanism was failing. Now, I was teaching them to listen for the irregular language that meant someone was lying. After the session, Mildred helped me stack chairs. The others had filtered out slowly, several stopping to shake my hand or ask follow-up questions. Dr. Gallagher had left quietly, his suspension still a raw wound. You're good at this, Mildred said, folding the last chair. Clear, patient. Opal would have loved this. I stopped mid-motion, turned to look at her. She'd be front row correcting your syntax, Mildred added, smiling faintly. I smiled, genuinely. For the first time in 8 months, something that wasn't grief or duty or mechanical courtesy. A real smile at the thought of Opal arguing grammar during financial literacy hour. Mildred noticed, said nothing. Just patted my shoulder and carried the folded chairs to the storage closet. 2 weeks later, mid-July, I drove to Augusta with a velvet pouch in the passenger seat. Maine State Museum occupied a limestone building near the Capitol. Classical columns, marble steps. The weight of history made architectural. I'd called ahead, scheduled the appointment, brought every document my father had hidden for 46 years. Dr. James Calloway met me in the administrative offices. 58 Maine State Archivist specialist in Cold War civilian cooperation records. He wore wire-rimmed glasses and a burgundy bow tie, his office lined floor to ceiling with archival boxes. Mr. Finch, he said, shaking my hand. I reviewed the preliminary materials you sent. Operation Amber Wave. Fascinating case. Very few civilian witness files from that era survived intact. I set the velvet pouch on his desk, opened it carefully. 17 uncut diamonds spilled onto the blotter, pale and rough, exactly as they'd been when my father had placed them in the hidden compartment in 1973. Calloway examined them with a jeweler's loupe, then set it down and opened the folder I'd brought. Transaction receipts from Canadian Arctic mines, the Refugee Assistance Ledger, the 1973 State Department letter confirming Harold Finch as civilian cooperating witness. Your father's service to Operation Amber Wave is now part of permanent federal historical record, Calloway said. The Department of Justice has authorized a commendation certificate for his file. He pulled a document from his desk drawer. Heavy parchment gold embossed seal official letterhead from the United States Department of Justice. Certificate of Historical Commendation. Awarded to Harold Finch, Civilian Cooperating Witness Operation, Amber Wave, 1968 to 1973. In recognition of material assistance provided to federal investigation and humanitarian contribution to refugee protection efforts. Signed, Deputy Director, Historical Records Division. He wanted these donated 50 years ago, I said quietly. I'm just finishing what he started. Calloway slid the certificate across the desk. The diamonds will be displayed in our Cold War exhibit. The files will be archived under federal civilian cooperation records. Your father's name is officially honored. Family name completely cleansed. Harold Finch, not smuggler, not criminal. Decorated witness, protector of refugees. Exactly what he'd been all along. I drove back to Harbor Watch with the certificate in a protective sleeve on the passenger seat, parked behind the shop, walked through the workshop to the 1904 regulator. 3 taps, quarter turn counterclockwise. The false panel opened. The compartment was empty now. No diamonds, no documents, just dust and felt lining and the ghost of 46 years' worth of family secrets. I placed the certificate inside, slid the panel closed. The panel clicked shut. Empty vault, full closure. That night, cleaning the workshop, I found the last unopened envelope from Opal, postmarked 3 days before, her stroke addressed in her hand, "Open when you're ready to forgive him." I wasn't sure I ever would be. I waited 3 months to open it, left it on the workbench where I could see it every day but never had to touch it. Forgiveness felt like something I'd need to grow into, not force. 1 year to the day after her memorial, I stood at Opal's headstone with white chrysanthemums in both hands and a report she'd never hear but deserved to know. The coastal cemetery overlooked Harbor Watch Harbor, salt air mixing with the scent of fresh flowers left by other mourners. October had turned the trees amber and gold, the same colors that had framed her memorial service 12 months earlier. Her headstone was simple gray granite, no flourishes, no sentiment beyond the facts. I knelt and placed the chrysanthemums, her favorite, against the base of the stone. White petals green, stems the kind she'd kept in a vase on the kitchen table every week for 30 years. 23 families kept their homes, I said quietly. Every dollar you documented came back to them, full restitution plus interest. Several walked away debt-free for the first time in their lives. The wind off the harbor carried the sound of gulls and distant boat engines. I traced her name with my finger. Opal Marie, Finch beloved wife, 1962 to 2023. Remy's serving his term, 28 to 35 years. He broke down at the prison visit. First real tears I'd seen from him in 41 years. I don't know if it was remorse or just understanding what he'd lost. Maybe both. A sailboat passed in the distance, white canvas against blue water. The shop's still open, Tuesday and Thursday by appointment, Saturday mornings for walk-ins. I'm teaching classes now, financial literacy, fraud prevention. Mildred co-teaches. Dr. Gallagher volunteers when his suspension allows. 20 people every Tuesday evening. They ask about you constantly. I pulled a fallen leaf from the base of the stone, tucked it into my pocket. Harold's name is in the state archive now. Decorated witness Operation Amber Wave. The diamonds are in the museum. The certificates sealed in the compartment where he hid them for 46 years. You'd have liked that, everything coming full circle. The accounting felt important. Opal had been a woman of ledgers and balances. She'd want to know the final tally. We did it, Opal. Every gear you aligned, it's done. Her name on the granite Opal, Finch beloved wife. No mention of auditor, investigator, savior, just wife. Somehow that felt right. The rest was context I'd carry, but the stone only needed to say what mattered most. I stood, brushed dirt from my knees, and stepped back. Then I heard footsteps on the gravel path behind me. Mildred appeared first, holding a bouquet of yellow roses. Then others, 15 people walking quietly in small groups, each carrying flowers. I recognized most of them. Faces from the Tuesday classes, families from the victim list, people Opal had saved without ever meeting face to face. Eleanor Pritchard led the second group. 76, white-haired, walking with a cane, but steady. Her family had owned harbor-adjacent land for 3 generations. Fishing docks, small rental cottages, modest income that had sustained them through decades. Remy's scheme had nearly taken it all. Opal's evidence had stopped the foreclosure 3 days before finalization. Eleanor stepped forward and placed a single red rose on the headstone beside my chrysanthemums. She saved our family lands. Eleanor said, her voice soft but clear. We needed her to know we remember. Others approached in turn. A middle-aged woman with daisies, an elderly couple with carnations. Carl Brennan, the fisherman from Tuesday class, with wildflowers picked from the roadside. Each placed their offering on or around the grave, building an impromptu garden of color and gratitude. Mildred waited until the others had finished, then set her yellow roses at the foot of the stone. She looked at me, eyes bright. Every Tuesday they ask about her, Mildred said quietly. I tell them she taught me everything. You taught yourself, I said. She showed me what mattered. There's a difference. The group stood in silence around the grave. No one spoke. No one needed to. The flowers said what words couldn't, that Opal's 2 years of sacrifice hadn't just saved assets, it had saved lives, families' futures. 15 people, 15 families she'd never met, who came to say thank you to stone and silence. I looked at the gathering at Mildred with Harold's pocket watch in her coat, at Eleanor leaning on her cane with 3 generations of land secured behind her, at Carl, who'd regained his fishing boat and his livelihood, at strangers who'd become students, then friends bound together by survival, and the woman who'd made it possible. 41 years raising a son who betrayed us. 2 years she spent saving everyone else. This is the legacy that survives. The sun dropped toward the harbor, casting the same golden light as her memorial service 1 year before. Amber and honey warming the granite and the flowers and the faces of people who'd come to remember someone they'd never thanked in life. Mildred touched my shoulder. "We'll give you a moment," she said. The group dispersed, slowly walking back down the gravel path in quiet pairs and trios. Mildred lingered, squeezed my hand, once nodded, and followed them. I stood alone again, surrounded by flowers. The envelope waited at home. Opal's final words about forgiveness written 3 days before the stroke that would kill her, addressed to a future version of me she'd hoped would be ready. I looked at her name on the stone, at the garden of gratitude built by strangers, at the harbor where boats still moved and tides still turned, and life continued in the stubborn, relentless way it always had. I had one more thing to do, one envelope still unopened, one choice still unmade. But standing there surrounded by proof that love could survive calculation, I thought maybe I was finally ready. I drove home from the cemetery as the sun set Opal's envelope still waiting on my workbench, where it had waited for months. But that night, I didn't open it. I realized I didn't need to. She'd already told me everything that mattered. That evening, I sat at my workbench under amber lamp glow, repairing a vintage pocket watch whose owner had been dead 3 years, when my phone vibrated with news that would make Opal's name permanent. The watch was delicate work, a 1947 Elgin with a frozen balance wheel and corroded hairspring. The family had found it in an estate sale, wanted it restored as a wedding gift. I'd been working on it for 2 hours, my hands steady, my focus complete. This was what I understood. Gears, springs, the mathematics of time made mechanical. My phone lit up on the corner of the bench. A text from Agent Kowalski. I set down my tools and read it. A Finch financial defense curriculum officially adopted by Maine Attorney General as mandatory statewide elder fraud prevention model. Rollout Q1 of 2025. Your Tuesday classes are now legal blueprint for every county in the state. I stared at the screen. Read it again. A second message followed. Opal's USB security protocol being written into new federal enforcement guidelines for elder abuse tracking. Her documentation method is now standard across all 50 states. Thought you'd want to know. I set the phone down carefully. Finch Financial Defense Curriculum. The name Remy had tried to weaponize the name he'd used to forge documents and destroy trust was now state law. Mandatory training, legal infrastructure designed to protect the vulnerable from predators like the man my son had become. Opal had built a case so thorough, so methodical, that prosecutors had used it as a template. And now that template was permanent, codified, required. The name he tried to destroy is now law. Opal, you built something that outlasts all of us. Her name in legal code now. Permanent as granite, harder to erase than any headstone. Every county in Maine would teach families to recognize the red flags she had documented. Every federal investigator would follow the audit trail structure she'd pioneered while dying from a fabricated illness. She'd turned her 2-year deception into a 200-year legacy. I picked up the pocket watch again, examined the balance wheel under magnification. The problem was visible now, a hairline crack in the jewel, bearing invisible to the naked eye, but catastrophic to function. I'd need to order a replacement part. Some repairs took time, some required patience and the right tools and the willingness to wait for what couldn't be rushed. I texted Kowalski back, "Thank you, she'd be proud." The response came immediately. She'd say it was just accounting. I smiled. That sounded exactly like Opal. I worked until midnight, then locked the shop, and walked home through quiet streets where 23 families slept in homes they still owned, in beds they had nearly lost, dreaming dreams they had almost been robbed of. The following morning, golden autumn sunlight flooded the shop. I stood at the front door with my hand on the sign I'd flipped to closed 12 months earlier, the day after Opal's memorial. The simplest movement, the heaviest symbolic weight. I turned it. Open. The bells above the door chimed as I propped it wide, letting October air sweep through the workshop. Cool, salt-tinged, alive. 10 minutes later, the first customer arrived. A boy, maybe 12, wearing a backpack and clutching a tarnished silver pocket watch in both hands like it was fragile treasure. He stepped inside, tentatively looking around at the walls of ticking clocks with wide eyes. "Can I help you?" I asked. He approached the counter, set the watch down carefully. "My granddad said you're the only man in the county who can make it tick again," the boy said. "Said Finches have been fixing what's broken in this town for 100 years. I picked up the watch, examined it. The case was worn smooth from decades of handling the crystal, scratched but intact. I opened it carefully. The movement inside was frozen gears, locked mainspring wound too tight and seized. "What's your name?" I asked. "Timothy Nash," he said. "My granddad's Ben. He said you saved his house." "Ben Ashford." "The fisherman from the victim list. 67 years old, lost his wife to cancer, nearly lost his family home to Remy's scheme. Opal's evidence had restored every dollar." "Your granddad's a good man," I said. "Let's see what stopped." I carried the watch to my workbench, set it under the lamp, and reached for my tools. Timothy followed, standing at a respectful distance watching. 41 years I spent on the wrong repair, but this clock's gears time moving forward this. I understand. The mainspring had been overwound by someone who didn't know better. The gear train was intact, but locked. I released the tension carefully, 1/4 turn at a time, feeling for the moment when the spring relaxed enough to free the wheels. The boy's watch had stopped at 3:47, same time Opal's pulse had. I wound the crown gently. It ticked. The sound filled the workshop, steady, mechanical, alive. Timothy's face lit up. "It works," he said. "It does," I said. "Needs cleaning and a new crystal, but the heart's sound. Come back Tuesday. I'll have it ready." "How much?" "Tell your granddad we're even," I said. Timothy took the watch, carefully cradled it, like the heirloom it was, and walked toward the door. He paused at the threshold. "Thank you," he said. "You're welcome." He left. The bells chimed. The door swung shut. Through the window, harbor fog rolled in off the Atlantic, the same as every October morning for 100 years. Clocks ticked on every wall, their rhythms overlapping into something close to harmony. I bent over the bench loop, to eye listening for the sound of something broken coming back to life. It always does, given time and careful hands. And to you listening to my story, remember this: the people closest to you can carry secrets that change everything. I spent 41 years teaching my son about honesty and precision. I thought trust was built through showing up, working side by side, keeping your word. But I missed the signs. I missed the distance growing between us. I didn't see that he resented the values I tried to instill. Don't make my mistake, don't assume love alone prevents betrayal. What I've learned is, this family betrayal doesn't happen overnight. It grows in silence and unspoken resentments in the gap between what we teach and what they choose. My wife saw what I couldn't see. I believe God gave her those 2 years, painful as they were, to protect families I didn't even know needed protecting. When you face family betrayal, the lesson isn't to distrust everyone. It's that vigilance and love aren't opposites. Sometimes the most loving thing is asking hard questions even when it's family. I'd like to hear from you. Have you experienced family betrayal like this trust broken by someone close? Leave a comment and share your thoughts. If this story resonated, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you'd like more stories like this, subscribe to Revenge Dad. Your support means everything. Thank you for staying until the very end. I know this wasn't easy to hear. Just a reminder, some details have been fictionalized for storytelling purposes, but the lessons remain true. What matters most is what you take from this and apply to your own life. Take care of yourself.